Greetings. My name is Gary Cordner. We're here at the ACJS conference in Kansas City, Missouri in 2017, and it's my pleasure today to interview Dr. Vince Webb, who you'll hear from momentarily. Vince, by way of very brief introduction, got his PhD from Iowa State University. He's had a long and distinguished career. Served either as chair, director, or dean at several different universities over their criminal justice and criminology programs, including the University of Nebraska at Omaha, Arizona State University, Southern Illinois University, and Sam Houston State University. And Vince is still at it. He's currently a professor at Arizona State University. He's received numerous awards during his career. Interestingly, probably, I'm guessing the only individual that there is in the world who has gotten both the ACJS Outstanding Paper Award and the Outstanding Book Award and the ACJS's Fellow Award and Founders Award. That's probably some kind of a combination that no one else has achieved, at least not yet. So with that brief introduction, Vince, welcome.
Thanks, Gary. It's a pleasure to be here, and of course it's a pleasure to have you do this interview because we've known each other for a long time. So I feel, actually privileged that you agreed to do this. So.
I'm grateful that you asked me to do it. It's my privilege as well. So to start this thing off, they've got this thing now called the internet, and so I've thoroughly searched the internet looking for details about you and your career, that I could throw at you to see if you could defend yourself, and picked up lots of information. There's a suspicion out there on the internet that somehow or another you're closely related to Jack Webb. Is that true?
Well, actually, my father's name was Jack Webb, but it's not the one you're thinking of. His real name was Lynn, but he always went by Jack, and he had a friend who would call. My father was an amateur radio operator, and he had a buddy in the small town that I grew up that would call always about the same time after dinner. Nebraska, we called supper, 6 o'clock, and I'd answer the phone, and he would say, "Is badge 714? Was it 714? I believe.
I'm not sure.
Whatever that Jack Webb's badge number was, his badge 714 there, So, yeah, my father was Jack Webb, but not the one. Not the one.
And just in case there's any viewers that are maybe younger than 60 years old,
yeah.
Jack Webb was the actor who played Joe Friday on the Dragnet series, which was probably the first, or one of the first police shows on television.
All right. I'll never forget when they made it into a movie. Of course, it was black and white. In the opening scene, they show this guy, and the next thing you see is the shotgun blast, the results of the shotgun blast. So all of the pellet holes start oozing blood. And I thought, that was the first really creepy thing like that I think I saw. Interestingly enough, this is really an aside. The reason we saw that movie was I was an altar boy in the Catholic Church, and a local priest had an event each year for the altar boys, and so that year it was to see Dragnet, and then hot dogs and sodas afterwards. So my first experience with gruesome violence in the movies was a result of being an altar boy. Strange deal.
And we'll get off this kick in just a second, but I have to say there's quite I think a facial resemblance between you and that Jack Webb, the one that was on television. So I think we're going to continue investigating whether there might be some connection.
Well, it'd be great if you find it, because might be able to claim part of an estate or something.
So on to serious stuff, Vince. I know that in your undergraduate and both of your graduate degrees were in sociology. Tell us about how you came to study that in college and then all the way through your PhD,
Right.
and where along the line your interest in crime and criminology and criminal justice developed out of that?
Well, I think, I've thought about this quite a bit, and it's, a lot of this stuff is mostly unplanned, it's a serendipity, throughout my career, and I think through a lot of careers. But when I was a kid, I was quite a reader. Small town, 1,480 people. Summers are really boring in these small towns, This is a pre-swimming pool day, what do? It's too hot to play baseball and so on. But I was an avid reader, as was my father, and so early on, my first memories of reading were the Hardy Boy books, and I was just fascinated by, boy, how cool it would be to be solving these mysteries, playing detective, and so on and so forth. And so I developed this kind of fascination with detective stuff and kind of law enforcement stuff. And when I was 13 years old, the county fair was held in my community, in this county in Nebraska. And one day I'm going down to the fair. This was always in August, a 3-day event. We look forward to this all year long. I mean, it was a big deal. And the ticket taker, there was a big hubbub going on because somebody had robbed the ticket taker.
Oh my!
In one of the entrances to the fair, and so we overheard this and so on and so forth. By happenstance, on the other side of the fairground, we're just doing our thing at the fairgrounds, looking for rides and so on and so forth. I noticed that somebody was wrapping up a guy in a carpet and putting him in the back of a van. And that seemed a little suspicious, right? So we went and reported this. The van took off and went down the highway. It was about 7 miles this side of Highway 81. We went and reported that, and sure enough, sooner or later, it wasn't much later, they got about 30 miles, and the state patrol stopped him, and this was the guy that. So I got to be a Hardy Boy for a day.
Excellent.
So I always had this kind of fascination with it, and with so when I went to started college, I was really fascinated by the intro to sociology course when we got to the part on delinquency and crime and deviance and so on and so forth. And I went to the University of Nebraska at Omaha at that time. One of the interesting things about that place was that the city of Omaha had brought from the West Coast a city manager who was familiar with police education in the community college system in California. That was all new to Nebraska. Anyway, he came in and got hooked up with one of the faculty members in the sociology department who had worked as done an internship and worked as a guard in the Iowa prison system, and who had been in the equivalent of, I guess, air security, or basically a police officer within the Air Force and so on and so forth, and convinced the university that they ought to start a program similar to the one in California. And so the sociology department had a division, and it was called LES, Law Enforcement and Security.
Yeah.
Now the problem was that, and so there were a number of courses in policing and criminal investigation and so on and so forth. But to be able to be in that program, you had to meet the requirements that you'd have to meet if you were going to be a police officer. And that, as a kid, is sort of what I aspired to be. But I couldn't meet the requirements because I had been in an accident, had a physical, permanent handicap, and so on and so forth. But still, there was enough courses that I could take in the sociology side of things. So, largely criminology, corrections courses, juvenile justice, you can call it that, juvenile delinquency, and so on and so forth. And then also I worked, supervised probationers then as my job, one of my jobs going through college. It was a community service sentence program where the courts would sentence kids to do whatever we wanted them to do at the YMCA, and I was in charge of that for a while. And then I also worked with youth groups in inner city schools in Omaha, Nebraska as well. So I've always sort of had a fascination with that. In the master's program, which was the University of Nebraska at Omaha, the university had changed by then. The courses that were available were theoretical criminology. They still call it penology, corrections. And then I was uncertain about what I was going to do, and so at the last minute, I I had an opportunity for an assistantship at Iowa State, and I was going to continue on that track, but this was like 1968, and things were topsy-turvy in higher education in a lot of places, and there had been kind of a purge of faculty who were viewed as being too radical about social justice and criminal justice types of issues, and they all left by the time I got there, and so there was really next to no opportunity, with the exception of one guy, Marty Miller, who was from Michigan State.
All right.
And I was able to work with him on some projects and some data sets and so on and so forth, but for the most part I wasn't able to do much in my PhD program. So I focused on statistics, quantitative methods, measurement, the way the program is structured, and actually had probably more stuff in statistics and psychology than I did in sociology. So I finished my degrees, looking for a job, and the first position I held was at Drake University, which is Des Moines, Iowa, down the road from Ames, Iowa, home of Iowa State, about 30 miles. And because I should go back, when I was a master's student, I taught criminology and delinquency at St. Mary's College in Omaha, Nebraska. So I had that on my resume already, experience. So they wanted me to take over the criminology, deviance, juvenile delinquency thing at Drake, and that's what I taught. Well, at this time, there was a program that LEAA started, which is really I think the initial program where they tried to build university agency research partnerships, and it was called Pilot Cities Program. Mm-hmm. Des Moines was one of the pilot cities. Omaha, Nebraska was one. Albuquerque, there are a couple more. I just don't remember, which ones they were. And the idea was they put a bunch of money into the university, and then the university would entertain proposals from the agencies for various innovative practices and so on. And typically the way these were organized, so for example at Drake, in the Pilot Cities program, there would be a court specialist, a correction specialist, and a police specialist. So they had the courts covered, they had the corrections covered, but they didn't have the police covered. And so they looked at me and said, "Would you be the police guy?" "Sure, I'll be the police guy." And so my job basically was, and I did work on the other projects too, at least on a court project, but my job was to really evaluate what the police department in Des Moines, Iowa was proposing, work with them, technical assistance to kind of shape up the project, make some sense, and evaluate it and that sort of thing. So that kind of got me in the door in the more of a criminal justice perspective than a criminology perspective per se, and I did work at the Des Moines Police Department. Chief Wendell Nichols, I remember going down, this is now 1972, I remember going down to the police department for my first meeting with Lieutenant Forrest, who was the research guy. So I was a young PhD, all full of research talk, and so I asked him, what are you working on, And he said, "Well, the chief's got me, gathering information on ultraviolet lights." There's the research director. He said, "Yeah, we've been having trouble getting people mixed up when we book them, so we want to, get a system where we can stamp them, and then, we can put their arm under the ultraviolet light to see if they've been booked in, and so on and so forth." And I thought, well, anyway, their major proposal was they were going to, on the morning shift, 7 o'clock, they were going to pick up a delinquent who was on sort of the last chance before they went to reform school. And they were going to spend a full shift on a ride-along. And this was going to go on for, I think, a period of 6 weeks. Now, they had thought through about, would this interrupt school? Would the kid learn more about police work than you wanted him to know? And it was going to cost about $40,000 a year, which was a lot of money per kid, which would have paid their whole 4 years at Drake if they could have got into Drake, And so about that time, the LEA regional representative, which was out of Kansas City region, said, "Well, there's people back in Omaha, where you're from, would like to talk to you about coming over." And so I talked to them, and I went over there and interviewed and visited, and I snooped around enough to realize, there's something not right here. It's going to be a problem. And I said, "No, thanks. I'll stay where I'm at." It wasn't long afterwards I got called back And they said, well, we got another project we'd like you to consider. And we're looking for a research director for what was called the Criminal Justice Graduate Development Consortium. I may have that a little bit wrong, and basically this was another LEA program that involved trying to get universities to develop or shore up existing PhD programs. So your old place at EKU, Eastern Kentucky State University, was part of that. Maryland was part of it. UNO was part of it. Michigan State, Portland State, and Arizona State were all part of that. And we had pretty substantial chunks of money to try to develop these supposedly supposed to be doctoral programs. Well, I was in a university where there were no doctoral programs, as was
EKU. Yeah.
It sort of reflected the naiveness on the part of LEA to think that you can just throw money out there and a university's going to build a PhD program.
Not that they wouldn't take the money.
Well, they took the money, right? Exactly, exactly, and that was the other part of that is the university would take the money. So anyway, I saw some opportunity there, and I went there as a research director, and I was able to work with a lot of people who were a lot more seasoned and experienced at this stuff than I was, and I worked with, Northeastern was one of the schools as well. So I worked with Norman Rosenblatt, Peter Legions at Maryland, Don Gibbons at Maryland. Portland, excuse me. People had been around and were well known and so on and so forth. It was a heck of an opportunity for, basically still a kid at that stage of the game. And, what had happened is that, all my instincts about something's not right here at UNO or at then, it was UNO by then, played out, and I soon became the project director rather than just the research director. And then a little bit later I became the chair of the department there. And so there I was working with all these some of them kind of world-class guys, and I was sort of the kid on the block, and I learned a lot from them and so on. But I had learned enough and had enough experience in higher education to know that if we were going to, prosper at UNO at that time, asking for exceptions wasn't going to work, So one of the first things I had to do as a chair was make a tenure decision on somebody who didn't have a terminal degree, and what was my first experience, not my only experience in a civil suit, but and so I decided the only way to win at this is to beat them at their own game, and their own game involves research, teaching, and service, and we've got to do better than other fields, other programs. We were fortunate there because part of the turmoil of the late 60s, early 70s resulted in the development of college public affairs and community service with more of an urban focus, and that really got us out of being part of sociology or part of arts and sciences and liberal arts and whatnot. So, and we had partners in public administration, social work, and so on and so forth. So it took about 20 years, but we finally got the PhD program there. But so that's kind of my story in terms of how I got involved in this stuff, and yeah.
I mean, before we go on to some of the things that you're just leading into, how was it for a kid from a really small town, ending up at the urban center?
Yeah, that's kind of interesting. And I really haven't thought about that too much. I think part of it was because I was a big, I was definitely a big reader when I was a kid. I was interested in the rest of the world and all those kinds of things. And we were talking to some people yesterday about the current state of politics and so on and so forth, and the continuing sort of migration to urban centers from small towns. I told the story of I had never gone to a class reunion in 2013 with my 50th, so I decided I'd better go. So I went back, and my graduating class in the small town was about 45, and there were 32 still alive.
Nice.
And so we're in a small town, which is now about 1,000 down from 1,480.
What's the name of the town?
Bloomfield, Nebraska. And where do you have a class reunion? Bowling alley. And I remember in high school, especially in the winter, we'd spend a lot of time bowling, and it seemed enormous to me, So I go down to the bowling alley 6 o'clock Friday, And holy smokes, it's about as wide as this room. There's 4 lanes. Like what happened, And so I tried to find, well, where would this event be? And usually it's a dinner and some speeches and some games and that kind of thing. And so I found a hallway and looked like maybe there's a party room back there. And I see 3 really old guys standing there, and I thought, I came all the way from, I was in Texas at the time, I came all the way from Texas. Did I get the date wrong, time wrong? What's the deal here? And then about that time, an old classmate came up and hugged me, and I realized, that I'm one of them. So in some ways, it was interesting because most people stayed behind.
Yeah.
Most of them were farmers, most of them were related to agriculture, and there were 3 of us there who had gone off to do, professional kinds of things. So I just fell in love with cities. I mean, the bigger the better. I mean, I had an opportunity to work in Chicago for a while. I just love the diversity that's involved, the pace, the whole thing. And so when I went back as dean to Sam Houston State University in Huntsville, it was convenient. Weren't the big traffic jams like I experience every day now and that kind of stuff.
Right.
But I missed the big cities. So,
Yeah.
And if you're crime and criminal justice is a problem no matter where you're at. But if that's what you're really interested in, I used to kind of get irritated with one of the study abroad programs we had because they would take the kids from Nebraska to London and all that kind of thing. They still do, and it's a great program. Don't get me wrong. But I thought, look. What we ought to be doing is we ought to be taking them to the inner cities of Detroit, looking at those systems, and so on and so forth. This is Omaha, Nebraska, low homicide rate, low crime rate, and so on. This is not what they're taught about. That's not what they're reading about, so on and so forth. They really need to experience this firsthand rather than.
Yeah.
But of course, that never happened. But for some reason, I've just always like cities.
Mm-hmm. And I was interested in your description of your doctoral studies because it turned out, as you said, that the sort of delinquency crim people had almost all left.
Right.
And the way I heard you describe it, as a result, you concentrated heavily, probably more than you would have, in methods and statistics.
Right.
How do you think that armed you for your future career?
Well, I think it armed me pretty well in that, I've always had this sort of, and I'm not exactly sure where this came from, really interest in application, real world kind of stuff and so on and so forth, from day one, and so it really equipped me with the kinds of tools for a lot of the stuff I've been involved in, which is largely, some would call it action research, a lot of evaluation projects and that kind of thing, and I just really always enjoyed being able to work with agencies and apply those skills, and I learned an awful lot through those programs. I was involved with the survey research laboratory, they called it, which was part of the statistics department there, and did work with them, and they had some really good people in the area of psychometrics there, and good statistics department. The way the doctoral program was structured, you had to have these outside cognate areas, and so one was statistics, the other one was actually psych, but it was measurement stuff within psych. So, and the philosophy there at the time, I'm not sure I agree with this, but the philosophy there was at the time is that if you learn research methods, analytical methods, and theory construction, it's sort of up to you to plug in the content as you go along.
Right.
And I have sort of mixed feelings about that kind of strategy, but it is one. The other thing I should say in terms of things that influenced me, again, I've been, sometimes I think I was a lot of it's just pure luck, no doubt about it. Sometimes it seemed like I was the wrong guy in the right place, and then sometimes the right guy in the wrong place, and then once in a while, but not very often the right guy in the right place. But so when we had the Educational Consortium grant, actually, the reason those grants were given, there was a political motive behind that. You may recall that the Safe Streets Act of 1968 was really the the person who was behind all that was Nebraska,
Mm-hmm.
and he was our senator in Nebraska, and so that's one of the reasons UNO definitely was part of that consortium. But also there was an attempt, according to some, to develop programs that would counter the influence of the more radical
I see.
kinds of criminological programs that were going on, Berkeley and so on and so forth. You
Uh-huh.
know. I happen to believe there's probably some truth to that, because one of the program monitors was a former police chief from Milwaukee. Carl Ham was his name. And he would come and do site visits, and so we'd do dinners and whatnot and have conversations, and he had some pretty definite ideas about, about this stuff that he shared with me. But one of our site visits, or the people who were evaluating the sites, because there was no way you're going to be able to put together a PhD program in a place like, when I went there was I think 7 faculty. I think only one of them had a PhD at that time. A couple were working on education degrees and so on and so forth. And I mean, I didn't take much to figure out this isn't going to fly, especially in a system where you had the flagship UNL on the Lincoln campus was going to not let UNO and Omaha campus have degrees, and so there was this pressure from the LEA to say, well, what's going on? How come you're not getting your doctorate program put together? It doesn't work that way. So they sent out to do a program evaluation of our project, and lo and behold, who did they send? In addition to the LEAA rep, I don't know if you ever came across her. Her name was Jean Moore.
Sure.
Yeah, and oh gosh, who was the dean at Albany? Not Dick Myron, but gosh, I just lost his name. He
Wasn't Wilkins, was it?
No, it was Wilkins. He was he and Frank Remington wrote some of the early stuff on plea bargaining. God darn it.
Right, I'm not sure.
Anyway, they sent. So here we've got the guy who's the dean at Albany coming to evaluate this, kind of weak effort to try to do and somehow we hit it off. And I don't know if he felt sorry for me or what, or maybe it's because I, listened to his sort of arrogant stuff, and so that also kind of gave me a step into a network of some of the, more prestigious and more deeply developed. Don Newman is who I'm thinking.
Don Newman. There you go.
Yeah, Don Newman is who I'm thinking of. Sorry about that. And so he was always a supporter, and he involved me in some things in Albany and whatnot. So I'm kind of getting off the track here.
We'll double back on some stuff, but since you're sort of getting into that, talk about the process that you did have to go through to eventually create the doctoral program there at Omaha.
Yeah, well, what happened was, so I went there in '73 and '74. I became the chair, and then I took a leave for a short while in 1979 it was, and first part of '80 to be the PAI for the Joint Commission on Criminology and Criminal Justice,
which I want to get into in a little while.
Yeah. And then when I went back, they wanted me to take over what was called the Center for Applied Urban Research, which I did. And then a couple of years later, they, said, well, could you do this criminal justice department too? And so I did that. And it was about that time where it seemed like maybe there was really a possibility of developing the doctoral program. But now the clock is running, and basically it was 1993, 20 years later, that we finally got the thing put together. And it was, university politics, UNL, Board of Regents. They were, the people from Lincoln who were on the Board of Regents and represented UNL were sort of dead set against, doctoral programs going on. So, but we were able to make it work, and it turns out that the CJ program there, the doctorate in CJ at UNL, was the first standalone doctoral program there. But the secret to success was really faculty development, because we had hired people who had gone through their careers, were becoming senior people, nationally recognized. And so we had all our ducks in a row, so to speak, and we had the faculty who had the right kind of credentials that you could not, really argue that, you're not suited, you're not able, you're not capable, you're not ready, sort of thing. And it was really satisfying to me because we had, like every university does, the annual spring awards thing, right? And the chancellor's up there, and he says, and now the award for outstanding, researcher. And he pauses, and he said, goes off script. He said, I got to tell you. He said, I'm flying back from New York the other day, and sitting next to this guy, and he's asking me who I am and what I do, and I talked to him, and he said, oh, really? He said, gee, I just saw one of your faculty quoted in the New York Times. It was Sam Walker that was quoted. And he said, I knew then that we'd made it, because we got the chancellor's attention finally, and so he went off script and talked about, how solid the program was, and so on and so forth, and yeah. But it was really, just sort of early on figured out, you're going to have to beat them at your own game. That means, you wanted to have faculty and develop faculty that have better credentials and that will hold up, and in fact it did. The interesting thing there, which is leads to a little bit of a sad side note, was that the chancellor of the University of Nebraska system at that time, or not of the system, but of UNL, was Graham Spanier.
Oh, he was on trial today.
Yeah, he's kind of the deep rock president of Penn State. When I was at Iowa State as a doctoral student, he was my office mate.
Wow.
Yeah, and so I knew him really quite well. And he went on, and it was very clear he was very, had a very clear career path in mind. Most of us are just sort of stumbling around, hoping that we can, get a job and raise our family and that kind of thing. But he was helpful because he, at that time, I was able to go meet with him and say, look, we're trying to do this. This is not really going to be competing with your campus, blah, 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 blah. And actually, he's published an article in Criminology. So I knew him quite well. But that was helpful. So we were able to have at least one LI on the other campus. Yeah.
So that's kind of a little bit of the story at UNO. Let's double back and talk a little bit about really sort of the development of the whole field. Connected up to the work that you did on the commission.
Right.
How'd that come about?
Well, again, it's a lot of serendipity. It kind of goes back to my involvement in the educational consortium. So, I got to know a lot of people, and I got to travel to a lot of campuses, and we had really, interesting discussions and about manpower needs in criminal justice agencies, about how to deliver graduate education. And so in some ways, I had these kind of senior mentors, although we didn't even know what that word meant in those days. But we had, all these really serious discussions about the nature of criminal justice education and so on. And I was part of that discussion. The guy who was the dean when I went to Omaha, back to Omaha, was a fellow by the name of Hubert Locke.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and he had been in the Detroit area, Wayne State, during all the riots and disturbances in the Detroit area, and wrote a book called The Care and Feeding of White Liberals, I think is what the name of the book was. And he was heavily involved with the Porter Foundation, who was trying to do some work in this, I think Police Foundation, excuse me.
Yeah.
Early on. Well, Hubert also had a pretty good network of people in this area, and one of them, although I'm never quite sure what the original connection was, Gordon Meisner. And Gordon Meisner was a decrim from Berkeley who wound up as the department chair at the University of Missouri at St. Louis. And through Hubert, I got connected with Gordon Meisner. And Gordon Meisner was working with like George Falcones at Michigan State and some of these other people who were having these, serious discussions and really, mobilizing to try to develop criminal justice education and to, see it treated fairly and with parity within higher education and so on. As a result of that, I was involved in establishing the Midwest Criminal Justice Association, which is affiliated with ACJS. That's how I got to the Joint Commission. So I was kind of on the ground floor, in a lot of ways. I mean, criminal justice, education, and criminology, but criminal justice itself, going back to August Vollmer and O.W. Wilson and so on and so forth, have been around since the 20s, but it was not widespread. And our own work eventually showed that, it probably was one of the fastest growing fields in the history of higher education. By the time we did the Joint Commission stuff, there were 1,400 programs, up from 30 or 40, 10 years earlier. So it was a pretty exciting time for me, and these guys, Falcones, Meisner, I think Matthias at South Carolina, Dick Myron at Albany, and so on and so forth, they had taken upon Rector Moore. They had taken upon themselves, and they referred to themselves as I think the hard labor group. There's a state park in North Carolina. It's either the hard labor or it's the Hard Rock,
I don't know,
state park or something. And on their own dollar, probably on their university dollar, they would get together and have these meetings. And the reason they called themselves that was their first meeting, they stayed at the state park, and they would have discussions about the nature of the field, what needed to be done, so on and so forth. And they weren't all on the same page by any stretch of the imagination. So I was able to get involved in that as well. So I just had this really wonderful opportunity as, again, relatively, I'd probably the youngest guy on the LREIS was involved in this, and a lot of people like, wow, and that kind of stuff. So I had this sort of was fortunate to just kind of fall into this sort of band of mentors, and able to be a part of the development of the field.
And just to sketch a little background, you can correct me after I sort of do that, but I mean, this was during a time period when really sort of just after the field had exploded, largely thanks to LEAA and LEAP, and as you said, the number of programs went from 40 to 1,400 or something like that, seemingly nearly overnight. Huge concerns, needless to say, about quality. And about whether the people teaching these programs were properly credentialed, and whether were the degrees appropriately academic, and so on and so forth. And so you became involved with this commission, who funded that?
That was funded by LEAA.
Funded by LEAA.
Yeah. And again, that was reflected in the concern about, as you say, the quality of what was going on. The belief was that there are a lot of universities and colleges were exploiting LEAP. The only reason they had these programs was to take advantage of LEAP funding and so on, and that once LEAP went away, the field would go away.
Right.
And there were a lot of people in higher education that actually believed that, and I faced that in my own place there in Omaha. And when I would do academic program reviews, I had several conversations with, we really think this has just been a fad, and that, criminal justice education, the students are wrong. Yeah, they lost a few programs, but not very many. I'm not sure what the count would be today, but it's probably even higher, I would imagine. But that was the issue. They were concerned about the quality of the field, and so that's why they funded the Joint Commission.
And for younger viewers who probably weren't around necessarily when the Commission's reports came out, just talk a little bit about what you did and what you found.
Well, basically, the strategy that we did in the Joint Commission, I was the principal investigator for it, and there was actually a commission. It was an attempt to bring together ASC and ACJS. ACJS, was actually formed as ACJS. That has a different, more history than this. I think 1970, after it was renamed.
Basically broke away from ASC as the International Association of Police Professors or something like that, and then they changed their name to ACJS.
Yeah, right, exactly. Let's see, where were we?
So sort of what the commission did and what you found. And
so the idea was to try to bring together those two organizations. That was pretty tough to do, but I mean, they did have people, representatives from both organizations sitting on the commission itself. And so our, a strategy was to try to dig into and understand, relying on empirical research where we could do it, relying on thought pieces, and any means possible to understand what the nature of the field was at that point in time. So we did focus on faculty, we did focus on curriculum, we did focus on students, we did focus on administration, various surveys, commissioned various papers, and so on to really understand what was happening with these 1,400 and some programs that existed at the time. And that was really the essence of the Joint Commission, to try to get a handle on the field, what its nature was, the quality of it, what the faculty were like, how they perceived the field, and so on. And then that resulted in the publication Quest for Quality.
Yeah. Okay. And you've brought up ACJS, and that was, as you said, ACJS was a participant in that institutionally, but ACJS was still quite young. I'm sort of remembering that at some point in ACJS history, you were part of the Young Turks, who were sort of, had a struggle for the direction and nature of this organization, ACJS. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I don't know if I remember that Young Turk part as clearly as I probably should. Well, it was the same thing that I talked about earlier when I figured out when we went back to Nebraska that we're going to have to beat them at their own game.
Mm-hmm.
We weren't going to be able to change the rules of what
That meaning higher education.
Higher education,
yeah.
The holy trinity of
Yeah.
of teaching, research, and service, and scholarship as part of that research business, and so on. And I think there were people about my generation, probably the oldest one of the Young Turks, but who sort of were on the same page with that and said, look, you're not going to be a viable, respected, successful academic field or organization, if you will, if you try to change the rules. Rather, what we have to do is we have to promote quality along the lines of kind of the core values of higher education. We can't change those values. So it was the same sort of struggle that you faced when you're trying to build a program, saying, no, we need to have people with PhDs. Yes, if we can find people with professional experience, with PhDs who are also scholars, and so on and so forth, that's probably the ultimate sort of thing. But we were dealing with that within ACJS itself. That wanted to have a different set of standards that just wasn't going to, from our perspective, going to fly in higher education. And so that's what it was about. And you have to keep in mind that when a lot of this was going on, first of all, the body of research literature on criminal justice was pretty small.
Mm-hmm.
That eventually explodes, right? And then secondly, the dissemination outlets for research were few and far in between. There was the Journal of Criminal Justice. Criminology was around, but criminology was, like that.
Mm-hmm.
And then there was a few other places, but it's not the kind of thing that, there was no Justice Corps, there was not nearly the same opportunity to publish research. And then also the funding mechanism for research was a lot less opportunity than eventually took place.
You brought up Justice Quarterly, and I think you were sort of there at the creation, or there in the debate about the creation, and the debate about what kind of journal it ought to be.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about that.
Well, that was an interesting one because all of a sudden you had even in the late 70s, in early 80s even, kind of a plethora of articles on criminal justice education and research pieces on criminal justice education, and we were all wrapped up in that.
We were all studying ourselves, basically.
Yeah, we basically were studying ourselves, and so when Justice Quarterly was formed, put together, I don't remember so much about Edith Flynn, who she was probably the first editor, I believe, and
Mm-hmm.
Frank Cullen the second one.
Mm-hmm.
But I do remember being on the board about the time that was put together, funded, developed, and Frank taking the position that Justice Quarterly will not publish any articles on criminal justice education. And by that time, I think an absolute no was probably not the right thing, but he was more right than wrong. I mean,
Uh-huh.
we really needed to promote, the publication and actually the development of substantive research on criminal justice topics, and so I think that was a good move. Yeah, but it was an interesting discussion, to say the least.
It seems to me there were some, I wasn't part of them, I was much too young, but there were some huge debates related to that around selection of editors.
Yeah, oh yeah, there was huge debates, there was hard feelings that developed. I don't know exactly if this is the right way to frame it. It's sort of like, it was kind of insiders versus outsiders, if you will, and that is that, well, this is the organization's journal, the editor ought to be an organizational loyalist, and that was took primacy over whatever your credentials happen to be, versus me, first and foremost, we want somebody who's a highly qualified, scholar themselves, who's got the right set of credentials and experiences and skills and abilities and support from their own institution to pull this off and make it a high-quality journal, which it is, and it's happened. But
exactly, I think experience shows that it's really risen in everybody's estimation.
Right. So I think all those debates were healthy and good, but I think in the end, the outcome was good.
Okay. Let's double back to your career a little bit. You stayed at Omaha a long time, and of course it was home.
Right.
But then you eventually left.
Yeah. I'll tell you one thing is I probably would do it differently. I am now old enough that I have to take minimum distributions from my retirement funds. And what I've been telling my younger colleagues is don't ever move because I've been to a number of places, and each one I have retirement and whatnot, and the paperwork just mounts and mounts and mounts and mounts and mounts. I don't know. I mean, I just had the reason I left Omaha was a little bit of wanderlust. It wasn't so much the grass was greener on the other side, but opportunities. I was involved in ACGS early on the board and past president and all that kind of stuff. But when I was done with that, I thought, I'm not putting anybody down, but I didn't really want to be someone who spent the rest of my career being, an ACGS professional. That's for the next, opportunity for the next person, and so on and so forth. My sort of 20-year goal at UNO had been to get the PhD program together, which, in some ways, it sounds really arrogant, I know, but I was pretty pleased that, we set out to do that. It took 20 years or so, but we finally got it pulled off, and so I was pleased that I've been able to be part of that process. So we got the PhD in 1993, and I've always had this philosophy, frankly, that if you're going to build a strong program, you need to you should always try to hire people that good and well are a lot better than you are. And I did that. Kind of put myself out of a job, if you will. But it was a time I was still had quite a bit of energy and whatnot, and the opportunities just weren't the same once the program was put in place and so on and so forth. And the reason I went to Arizona was almost accidental. I mean, when we had that consortium in the early 70s, they tried to get me to go there to be involved in our consortium coordinator's office was at ASU back then. And so I'd always had kind of a relationship with ASU, but anyway, I got a call to do a program review at Arizona State. Myself and Doris McKenzie did that review, and they'd had kind of a mess on their hands there, and so we made some recommendations, this, that, and the other kind of thing, and then a couple weeks later I had a call and said, would you be interested in coming down here? Well, so I went back down and eventually, chaired the program and kind of worked to turn it around and do some development. So, in some ways, people will say my heart's always been in Omaha, and I think there's some truth to that. Well, in fact, as you probably know, there's a bit of an odd story. So 2 years ago, my wife and I are going to do this transatlantic cruise. So we fly to New York, and I get to LaGuardia, check my cell phone, turn it on, and I get a call from voicemail and from John Bartle, who's the Dean of the College of Public Affairs and Community Services at the University of Nebraska at Omaha. And he said, would you give me a call? So I gave him a call. Well, I says, would you be interested in coming back here as an interim chair, or could be even chair for 1, 2, or 3 years? And I said, well, I'm just getting ready to go on a cruise, and my wife realizes something's up, and her eyes are getting like that. See the horns coming out.
Another crazy idea.
Another crazy idea. And so one thing led to another, and what happened then for a year, 2015, University of Nebraska bought half of my time from ASU. It was like it was a grant, would bill ASU, and all my salary and benefits was still from ASU. So I served as the interim director again, having gone back really roughly about 20 years later to do that. And so I still have a pretty big connection. But I always wanted to try to live in a different part of the country and feel, experience that. I always was fascinated with the West, but I would have probably gone to any big city if I'd had the opportunity just to experience it. And ASU was great. I mean, because as you probably know, what they had going there was the Justice Studies program on the Tempe campus, and that program had a very a different kind of orientation. It wasn't mainstream criminology, or it wasn't mainstream by then criminal justice, and kind of a critical program, at least some faculty were in. They really hadn't done much to reach out to the local community, to the local agencies. And I'd done quite a bit of work while I was in Nebraska with, Omaha wasn't that big a place, but the metropolitan area is about, 500,000, 600,000. And I worked carefully with the police department, with probation, with corrections, all those different agencies, really. And so I started knocking on doors there, and it was really amazing how easy it was to get them to open up, just because nobody had been there before, months or not very. Probation agencies, John Hepburn, and had been there for a long time and had done some work with them, but policing agencies now. And so we just had really great opportunities there.
And that's a big metro area.
Yeah, to do stuff with a lot of agencies, and whatnot. And so it was also a great time to be doing that, because there was a lot of the, cops funding going on, and focus on problem-solving policing, and so we were able to work with a number of the agencies, police agencies, still are today, So then I, thought I was going to try to get closer to where my wife lived, which was in Chicago, and I didn't really look at the map, so I finally left there, went to Southern Illinois for 1 year, and I realized I could get to Chicago faster from Phoenix than I could from Carbondale. And so then I got recruited. I had been recruited once before to be the dean at right after Flanagan, but I'd only been at ASU for a year, and I just liked it, and I wanted to stick with that for a while. And so in 2006, I got the call, and I thought, well, here's another slice of life that I hadn't experienced before. So I went down there, and then I left there in 2015.
So you were at Sam Houston for like 8 or 9 years.
Yeah, right.
So that's a pretty good stretch.
Yeah, it was a good stretch, but it was a real different kind of opportunity, and a good opportunity, and a great place. I think historically, I think what goes on there is far better than sometimes the reputation that it has.
Right.
But again, we used kind of the same approach, trying to build the strongest possible faculty. Sam still had some of the old early 60s kinds of, you mentioned before the awards. I think Del Carmen, I think have a tie.
Oh, okay. All right. Rolando Del Carmen. Yeah.
Different awards, but at least I think in sheer numbers from ACJS we have.
A longtime professor at St.
So it was fun. I mean, that was an interesting experience for me, because it was a college. We had I know you've been involved in the Law Enforcement Management Institute Texas, which is a big, professional development organization, law enforcement. We had the Correctional Management Institute Texas, and we had a hotel, a restaurant, all stuff that I hadn't experienced before. And so, it was, again, a new, really interesting opportunity for me to do some new things and to try to sort of reinvigorate the place and improve its national reputation. And, I think we were able to do that. I mean, frankly, this past year, it's always 24 different ways of criticizing these studies, of ranking on publications and that kind of stuff, But it was, with some satisfaction that the last one that was published, actually Sam Houston was #1.
Really?
Yeah, really. So, and here's the key to anybody who's interested in how do you motivate faculty to do more research and publish: money.
There's a radical idea.
So we were able, because of the flexibility there, we were able to incentivize people to actually get their work into good journals and that kind of stuff. And that worked pretty well. And then, when I left Arizona State, we kept a home there, and had always had that home. While I was at Southern Illinois, or at Sam Houston State University, and so I went back there, and was fortunate enough that someone would take me back in at ASU, and in the center, actually, of violence prevention and community safety is something I started when I was there. I was there before, so. And so now, I'm still doing kind of nothing administratively, but I'm working with, Phoenix Police Department on a couple different projects, body worn cameras, on focused deterrence, gang members. I am doing part of the Justice Innovation Center that NIJ has funded for small rural, tribal, and border agencies. We're doing some stuff there, and so I love doing that kind of work and working with those agencies.
Let me dig into that a little bit. So, I mean, I'm not sure I can do the arithmetic, but for probably something like 30 years, or again, I'm not sure I got the math right, you were a chair or a director or a dean or something like that. You've had almost, not your entire career, but a really big chunk of your career, you've had administrative assignments, and yet you've been extremely productive as a scholar. How did you manage to do that?
Well, I've been involved in administration except for the first 2 years and the last 2 years.
Yeah.
And so that means 40 years.
Okay. Well, scratch 30, make it 40.
I don't know that I've been as productive as I would have liked to have been. And I'll be honest that after all the dean stuff and whatnot, came back to ASU feeling rusty for what I do, and we're surrounded by these really smart young people who've got all kinds of modern day quantitative skills and so on and so forth. A lot more dependent on them than I used to be on myself and that kind of thing. And then I compared myself to people you would both know, but I won't name because I don't want to flatter them too much, who have done what I've done and been a lot more productive at the same time. And the only reason I would do the dean thing, I looked at a couple other dean's jobs, and I thought about a career advancing up in higher education, and I'm glad that we have people that want to do that. But when I really thought about it, and here's what they do and so on and so forth, just seemed like that would be really boring. And I'm not so sure I'm always the best guy for detail and that kind of thing. And so the only reason I went to Sam as the dean was because it was still in criminal justice.
Right.
Right. It would have been a liberal arts college or arts and sciences and whatnot. I figured out a long time ago that wasn't for me. I had to be working in an area that I really had a substantive interest in. Sam afforded that opportunity, but being a department chair did that. I think if I were going to do a self-evaluation, I've been probably a lot better at program development and administration than I am as a scholar by a stretch of imagination. But,
I'm not sure anybody that studied your CV would come to that conclusion. The gangs book that you did with your former student, an award-winning book, and I know one that you're quite proud of. How'd that come to pass?
Well, to me it's an interesting history, but I'm not sure everybody would agree. So when I was back in at UNO, I knew it's a small enough place that you knew all the agency officials, and the chief of police then was a guy by the name of Jim Skinner, and we had a pretty good relationship, and eventually, it turns out he built a house next to mine, which kind of soured the relationship.
He got to know you better.
Contractors managed to bust out some of my windows. But anyway, I was involved in a lot of things in the community beyond the police department, and this was about the time that there was starting to be some gang violence, and there was concerns about Bloods and Crips, and there was the belief that the Bloods and Crips were migrating from California into Omaha and distributing guns and drugs and so on and so forth. So they put together this kind of blue ribbon committee. It was pretty blue ribbon, except for me. I mean, it was the president of the Union Pacific Railroad and places like that in town, because.
Was Marlon Perkins on it?
No, Marlon wasn't there, but Stan. He was sergeant of arms outside the door in case any cobras came in. They could python, so they could wrestle.
For younger viewers, Marlon Perkins was a famous TV personality. Mutual of Omaha.
Mutual of Omaha, that's right. So all the big business guys were there because they were concerned about this gang violence and what it meant for the image of the city and their employees and so on and so forth. So I sat on that committee, and then there was a lot of pressure being put on the police department to do something about this. Frankly, Jim Skinner didn't know quite what to do. And so he got a hold of me and said, can you help me out? And, can we figure out what a gang unit should be doing and so on and so forth. And that was really what opened the door. And so Chuck was doing an independent study with me on gangs. Reads just some really classic literature on that. And so his dissertation was basically an observational study of the Omaha gang unit, what they did. So we practically lived with these guys for a period of time. And really, the next thing we did was we took that project that he had and we expanded it and applied to NIJ to get funding to do a 5-city study of gang units. And the idea was, again, we were trying to find out what is it they actually do and what seems to be working and what doesn't seem to be working. And so it was a kind of I guess today they would say sort of a mixed method sort of strategy, but it was a lot of qualitative, observational kind of work. Interviews, following these guys around, and that sort of thing. The cities were Las Vegas, Albuquerque, Phoenix. One was the suburb of in the LA area. Getting older, can't remember these names. Anyway, so we spent the better part of the year interviewing, observing, collecting data, and so on and so forth on these different gang units, trying to figure out what these guys actually did. And we found, if you ever had a chance to look at the book, quite a variety from one agency to the next. And I think one of our overall sort of recommendations is that one size doesn't fit all. Because this was at a time that all of a sudden gang units were catching on like wildfire, and may well in some cases added to the problem rather than on top of the problem, because when you have a gang unit, it means you got a gang problem, right? What was interesting in that project to me, and one of the findings, I don't know that we even talk about this much in the book, but the dissemination of information among police agencies, and that is I would hear the same story in each of the sites as though it occurred there. And so I got to thinking about that, and I think part of that is I wondered how that happens, whether it was through trainings, where people, working in the gang units, there's an association of these folks, they get together and whatnot, and somebody's there changing information, and I pick up that information and adopt it as well. So every place we went, we talked about, we were told that one of their gang problems was the Marolistas from Cuba that had come to their city, were responsible for part of the gang problem. Every place, Phoenix, Albuquerque.
Those guys really got around.
Las Vegas. Yeah, right. So anyway, that's how that book come to play.
Nice.
Yeah, it was fun, and I've always thought about trying to be really interesting to be able to go back and see what's happened. But
So Chuck Katz, obviously one of your star students on the faculty at ASU now. Any other students that you'd want to highlight as, I don't know, particularly proud of them, or?
I'm proud of all of them. You're going to give me trouble. The old guy who's having trouble remembering names. Well, now that's out there. Well, keep in mind, as I said, shortly after the doctoral program, I left. In fact, I had to come back for Chuck's dissertation stuff, and actually Ed McGuire turned out to be the chair, and I was just on the committee, and so on and so forth. So I didn't really have doctoral students at I think what I'm most proud of is some of the faculty that we were able to hire. It's such a different world, because when I was leaving the sociology program, for example, if a PhD student had a publication when they left, holy smokes, I mean, that was like a big deal, right? Now, these poor kids come out, as their PhD, and if they don't have, half a dozen publications of some sort, they ain't got a shot at a job, and that's what changed. So,
and this is the system that you built. I mean, you created this, right?
Yeah. So here's how a lot of this went. So when we had the educational development grant to develop a PhD program, all of a sudden I was left with a whole bunch of money. This was like, now keep in mind, 73, 74. For part of that project, it was $628,000. I'll never forget the amount. That was a lot of money. And all that money was basically for faculty lines and whatnot, but it was all soft money. And then there was a bunch of money for fellowships as well, another couple $100,000. Well, that's big bucks back in those days. So all of a sudden, there was real turmoil and some nasty stuff that went on, and that's why I was sort of cast into being the project director for that. So I realized, especially after Newman, those people came out and said, hey, nothing's happening here, that we needed to fill some of these positions, or they're going to take the money away and whatnot, and that kind of thing. So how do we do that? Well, it was really interesting, because one day I get a knock on my office door, and there's a guy that I had gone to master's school with, who was actually in the social work program. And he said, I want to introduce you to somebody. And I said, sure. So in comes Sam Walker. Now Sam had 2 publications. He had an article on, he was kind of more of a critical, well, he's always been kind of critical, but not this radical kind of criticism, but his one was, had to do with, I think it was the State Patrol in New York, and or Syracuse Police or something like that. And the other one was he had a forthcoming book from Lexington Press on the history of police. Exact title. And man, I was wowed by that. Holy smokes, I mean, remember, I've got like 5 or 6, 7 faculty, none of them got PhDs, and somebody's got a PhD and has actually got a book. And so we hired other, Julie Horney, we hired, eventually Cassie Spahn. I mean, so I think the thing that I think more that I'm most proud about is really the faculty development. Yeah, when, and it took time. Those things don't happen overnight. I mean, if you look at Walker's record now and what he's going for and so on and so forth versus when he started, or any of those people that we hired. And so,
how did it happen that he was just wandering through Omaha?
I was trying to remember what the connection was. I think those guys were hooked up because Sam was involved in the Selma, Alabama marches. And
so civil rights stuff.
Civil rights stuff. And John Ellis was the other guy's name, and so was John, very much an activist in civil rights and that kind of thing. And I think that's kind of what the connection. And then Sam's wife at the time was going to Creighton Law School, but I don't know if that's why she came there or why they came there. I think it was the civil rights.
So your advice would be that if a guy like Sam Walker stumbles in looking for a job, hire him?
Yeah, if you could predict that. But that's it's more than just hiring the right. It's more than just hiring. You got to support them. You got to look out for them. Sometimes you got to watch their back when they write the editorial to the paper that POs everybody in the police department, and those kinds of things. And so it's a slow process. Yeah. So I mean, that's probably. I think administrators, people who want to be leaders in this business, need to really kind of see themselves as opportunity makers, provide opportunities for others, not necessarily yourself. And when I sort of say what's common element wherever I've gone, it's kind of been, trying to provide. Part of that's insecurity because, as I said earlier, you always want to hire somebody better than yourself. Well, some would say, well, it didn't take much for you, but.
Let me touch on a topic that we haven't touched on. I know it's something that has been an interest of yours for a pretty good while. And then I think when you were at Sam Houston especially, you were able to take a big advantage of it, and that's international connections, but both scholarly and in terms of programming.
Right.
Talk about that from your perspective and where you think that's headed.
Well, that's one of the if I have a regret of not sort of being in an administrative role where I can control some things, that's one of the areas that I regret because I really did, really felt like, especially at Sam, and the interesting thing about Sam Houston State University, you don't think of it as it's not an R1 university, it's not really a big research kind of place, it's a regional university, and you would think that a place like that is not going to be supportive of international education or international travel and that kind of thing, and quite the opposite of that, I mean, it was really easy to do things there compared to, other kinds of places, and I just thought that, and so we had a lot of relationships with countries in Eastern Europe, Asia, South America as well, but I would say the one that is most fully developed was the one we developed with China. And I think it's probably almost the response is almost a stock one in that you can learn a lot by being exposed to a different system, and they can learn a lot by being exposed to us. But developing those programs provides a lot of opportunities. Opportunity maker, right? A lot of faculty have been able to take advantage of experiences that they would never have if those programs weren't in place, and a lot of students. The one that I'm really the most proud of is the one in China. That is a program that we developed with the Zhejiang Police College in Zhejiang province in China, 150 miles or so southwest of Shanghai. And actually what that evolved into was the development of a dual degree program. So they have students, the way it all started was, first it was just kind of a show and tell, come and take some courses, but not necessarily going to get university credit, and that really evolved into a dual degree. So these students, what happens is faculty go over there for a 2-week period and they'll teach part of a course. And for the first 2 years of these students, they'll be exposed to a lot of different faculty. So I might take, in the intro course, I might do corrections, you might do police, and somebody else might do the law, and that kind of thing, And so they build up a number of basic kind of the foundation courses for their first 2 years, and then the third year they come to SAM. They spend a year and a summer there taking courses there. Then they go back and they finish fourth year back in China and do an internship, and then when they graduate they get a degree from them, a degree from Sam Houston State University. The thing about that program was that it provided so many opportunities for faculty really to go and teach in that program because of this kind of 2-week sort of business, And so, and it was a useful tool in recruiting because you could be a brand new PhD and say, hey, not this fall, but next fall, how would you like to go to China for 2 weeks?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah. I think that program deserves a lot more attention than it really received because I don't think there's anything like it in this country where you're really working with a police college in China, and so I think it's unique. But again, I think it's it's an eye opener. I mean, the people that I've taken to China, it's been an eye opener for them. They really have no idea what that society and culture is like and what's going on there and so on and so forth. And so I just think it broadens everybody's education, and I'm not so sure what we've learned from them. I mean, the police college per se, we know about a lot about how they operate and so on and so forth. When we developed that program, it was really interesting because the president of the university and his entourage came, and the thing that they were concerned about was who supervises the students. Now, in the police college, most police colleges in China are 3 years, not 4 years. This one evolved into a 4-year, and I think there are 4 national police colleges. One actually is more on corrections, I think, or it's fire safety or something like that. And then there are 3 others that are sort of really part of the central ministry, and then there are these other colleges. So, for example, Shanghai has its own police college. The thing about the police college there is it's a walled campus. Students get out of there like 4 hours a week or something like that, so they come to American campus, they're all on walls, there's no guards, at the entryway, The main thing was being focused on security, or supervision, who supervises these students? Well, how do you keep the boys away from the girls? And it took a couple of their visits to say, it's not the way it works here, and interesting. I think that those are the sort of things that had an impact because they loosened up their rules, and when we started with 4 weeks off campus over there, now they can pretty much go every day, come and go every day, and that kind of thing. So I'm kind of rambling about that. It's hard sometimes to pinpoint exactly what the value, what the return on investment is of those kinds of programs, but I can tell you what. I can name numerous faculty that would not have had the experience that they've had if it weren't for a program like that being in place. Those programs are a lot of work, and so it's been hard to translate that into other campus settings that I've been involved in because it takes an investment. You've got to have staff that want to do it, and it's not clear. Maybe, as when we get to the point where we wrap up here, I'll be able to give my sermon on what in this field and really relates to this.
Okay, and maybe we should go to that sermon. I think we're sort of closing in on the end.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Well, and so I'm thinking, I'm at the end, close to the end of my career probably, and who knows how many years, but some of the concerns I have. And I just mentioned that, one of the problems with the international program development is that there's a lot of work. It's not clear what the return on investment is, especially in doctoral level programs where we've placed, in my opinion, way too much emphasis on publication. I think overpublishing is a real problem that needs to be tackled. Doctoral students that I work with, are socialized to, what's your impact factor? And, places I've been, the impact factor is now part of the evaluation, and it's really trickled up, or maybe it's down, but I think it's up to graduate college administration in some places. They want to know about that kind of stuff, and so I'm concerned about the overpublishing, about the salami slicing publishing, piecemeal publishing, all that kind of stuff, and a lot of people are, over exploiting existing secondary data analysis and not out there doing, primary stuff, and where's the next generation of Gary Cordners and Jack Greens and those people who work with agencies and so on and so forth. How do we prepare those people, or are we preparing them? So when you're dealing with an international program, like with Police College in China, it takes a lot of energy and a lot of time and so on and so forth, and it doesn't lead to, an improvement in your impact factor. and so it's hard to get people in programs that are aspiring to, move on up to the top, and even doctoral students who are savvy, they know, like, hey, if I'm going to get out of here and get a good job, I better, have that half dozen or a dozen publications in places. And you don't do that by going out and doing a lot of primary data collection. You do that by using your data, by collecting your own. So And I think there's a conversation that's going on about that. And I hope we see the day where we kind of pull in the reins a little bit, become a little bit more concerned about what the impact of our work is on the field itself, on, I don't mean on field of criminal justice or criminology, but on the society and world that we live in versus
Right.
Just our own CVs.
You've mentioned a couple times that, you decided early on that that what our field needed to do was beat them at their game, within the rules of higher education.
Right.
And I'm not sure if you'd agree, but I mean, maybe there's a sense that we've succeeded in that.
Yeah, I think we.
And now it might be time to catch our breath and take stock of striking a balance or.
Oh, I agree with you 100%. I think you're absolutely right. And there was the Association of Doctoral Programs in Criminology and Criminal Justice, at least 2 or 3 years ago when they met at SAM. That was part of the discussion, part of the agenda. I think there is a conversation going on, like you say. Hey, we've shown we can do it. We're not going away. We, in many cases, have beat them at their own game, but now. And I think, the translational research movement, a lot of what NIJ has been trying to promote, publish, is nudging us in that direction. I think that's a very good thing. Yeah.
I'd like to thank you for this opportunity to have this chat.
Yeah, well, I appreciate it. This is a great way to kind of wind up, all the thoughts and whatnot I've had about this field, but I could probably keep you on for another 2 days, but I won't do that.
Thanks for watching this video. Hope you enjoyed it as much as we did.